And I was just telling them I don't need a mic. I know we have a lot of outside folks coming in, and so I just felt the need to ask the organizers. It is a student event, so we will turn it over to them. If I could just welcome you to the building. So welcome to the building. Welcome to Capital University Law School. If you haven't been here before, we look forward to a robust exchange of ideas. This is an academic institution that values a robust exchange of ideas, and we do value academic freedom. On the flip side of that, we also have policies, understandably, against all kinds of things that you can imagine. But we trust we're going to have a good and fruitful debate and discussion. Maybe not debate, but discussion. And I look forward to seeing this unfold. So with that, I turn it over to the student organizers. And it's your show.
Hello, everybody. My name is Therese. Hello, everybody online. My name is Therese. I am president of our Cap Law ACLU. I just want to talk about why we are co-sponsoring this event really quickly. The event is titled The Illegal Occupation of Palestine. It is outside the purview for ACLU to take any stance on international affairs. So why are we here? We are here specifically because the flyers that were made for this event originally were getting thrown out. We are here because we were told that SBA is point blank refusing to promote the event. And those are efforts to limit our outreach for this event and sequester ideas that might be controversial to some, but the ACLU has always fought for your right to have important dialogue, and that is being challenged with this event. We are seeing all around the nation, the pro-Palestine side of this, I hesitate to say conflict, but in my capacity as ACLU president, I'm going to say conflict. We're only seeing the pro-Palestine side be suppressed. You can look that up on the ACLU national website. There is an open letter to colleges and universities not to restrict constitutionally protected speech here on campus. And luckily, our university is not one of those that needed a letter. So our only role as co-sponsor is to inform you all of the widespread legislation that is forbidding boycotts of Israel and the protests that are on the pro-Palestine side, and encourage you all to use your First Amendment rights no matter what your viewpoints are. And I didn't plan to say this, but there are cops in the building. So as ACLU, I just want to make sure that you all know that you have rights. Know your rights. As somebody that works at the Public Defender's Office, make sure that you say, I want my lawyer if you are ever stopped for a protest. But that is my only role here. I'll turn it over to Chris.
Hello all. Can you hear me on this one? Good afternoon. My name is Christopher. We are honored here to have you all with us, especially our distinguished speakers, and recognize the sensitivity of this issue, and are committed to fostering a respectful and professional dialogue. At the outset of this discussion, we'd like to remind everyone that we will be following the law school's anti-discrimination, human dignity and bias, and anti-hazing policy. The first speaker will start in just a moment, but just all you folks here that are Capital Law students, we understand there's classes at 1 p.m. There's only one class that starts 1 p.m., secure transactions. So if you are in that class, we ask that you try and make your way to be near the door in the least disturbing way possible. This event is planned to go till around 1:30 p.m., just so you know. And I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mazen Rasul, who is an attorney here in Columbus, an immigration attorney, and he is a Capital Law alumni as well. So if you guys would join me in welcoming Mazen.
Thank you. Better? All right. Can you all hear me? Online. Can you hear me? With the mic? Good? All right, I see that one. Well, thank you all for coming. It's really wonderful to see such a big crowd at this event. I was a student here, and I've never seen this number of people attend any event, really, back when I was a student here. And thanks for Capital Law for hosting this event and allowing it to move forward with all of what's going on, trying to suppress Palestinian voices. Let me start with a few things. So I think we need to agree on a few definitions and terms and basic ground words and terms that would allow this conversation to move forward. First of all, we're all here attorneys and hopefully attorneys to be, and people speaking about a subject from a legal standpoint, right? Not from a religious one. Everyone's religion is his or her own to believe in or not believe in. Whatever your God or whatever God told you or promised you or didn't is between you and him. So we're just going to talk about law and politics now. Now let's also agree on this. Israel is a foreign government. It's a political entity. It is not a religion. It does not represent a religion. It's a foreign entity. It could call itself a religious entity or religious government, but it is a government and a political entity. Zionism is a very important word for everyone to understand. Is an ideology. It's a political ideology that was first introduced about 120 years ago in the late 1800s. It is, again, a political ideology. It is not a religion. Judaism, on the other hand, is a religion, such as same as Islam, same as Christianity, same as Buddhism, and other religions out there. Now, anti-Semitism is bad, right? We all agree to that. And it is targeting people specifically because of their faith and because of certain stigmas or wrong ideas about that faith and followers of that faith. And anti-Semitism originated in Europe. And there's so much history about that and what that led to, unfortunately. Islamophobia is also targeting people because of their religion, or probably because of their race too, based on the idea that everyone from that one specific race from the Middle East and South Asia are from that one religion. So, whatever we're talking today, we're talking politics. We're talking about a government and a political ideology, not a religion. The idea of mixing these all together has been so widely misrepresenting this whole cause. Everything we talk about. The idea of mixing a government and a political entity and a political ideology with religion, with anti-Semitism is completely false, misleading, and it actually undermines how bad anti-Semitism is. There are many organizations that try to redefine anti-Semitism in recent history, in 2016 and beyond that, trying to redefine it and trying to state that or claim that, criticizing the state of Israel, criticizing Zionism is anti-Semitism. And that is false. And that is actually really, it hurts anti-Semitism, and it hurts the idea of the notion of how dangerous it is to be an anti-Semite or Islamophobic or hating people for their race or their religion. All right. Now, let's talk more about some boring history, okay? So, really, I could have, when I was tasked to speak about the history of Palestine, the first thing came in mind is this map. I'm sure many of you have seen it already. And really just looking at this map, I could probably rest my case and sit down because it really just tells you the whole story. But I'll explain a little bit more to do more of my due diligence. The land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, historically known as Palestine, has been home to many people throughout history. We could go back thousands of years, back to the Canaanites, the Jebusites, how do you say it in English? The Israelites came after, the Romans, so many empires. Almost every empire that you could think of that ever existed had its turn in controlling and occupying this piece of land. But I'm not going to go that far, because we're not going to go back 4,000 years. I just have 5 more minutes probably left. So let's talk in recent modern history, okay? So for about 400 or so years, this land was controlled by or conquered by the Ottoman Empire, which controlled most of the Middle East. Ottoman Empire was an Islamic empire, and these had districts, and Palestine was part of the Levant district, which included Palestine, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. The majority of the population who lived in the land were Arabs, who belonged to different faiths. The majority were Muslim. There was also Christian presence, about 20% probably of the population. There was Jewish presence. Some of the Jewish presence considered themselves, some of the Jews who lived there considered themselves to be Arabs as well, as a race. Again, race is different than religion. While others were immigrants or moved from Europe and other places around the world to live there. So over 90% of the population who lived in that piece of land for that period of time consider themselves to be Arabs. All right, now what happened is World War I, right? World War I, everyone fought each other and the Roman Empire fell. Now during that process, to combat the Ottoman Empire, we have the Allies, which included mainly France and the UK, the United Kingdom. They made certain promises, which led us to where we are today. They promised the Arabs who were in that area that if you guys help us and revolt against the Ottomans, once we're done with them, we will give you guys a national Arab country, expanding in the whole region. They also promised founders of the Zionist movement back then that if you guys help us as well in other ways, we will give you this land. And let's go back a little bit to Zionism, just 1 second. In the late 1800s, Zionism was founded by Theodor Herzl and other members. And the idea that they had was that they needed to create a state for themselves, or where Jews would call home. And this was partially due to, or it was due to the increasing anti-Semitism against Jews around Europe that extended for centuries, really, and there's no doubt about that. So they said the only way we would be safe if we have our own country for ourselves. And they debated where should we build this country. They discussed different things. They had different delegations go and look at different areas in the world. So there's Argentina, Uganda, other places. And eventually they settled on Palestine due to religious reasons, obviously. And once they decided that in the late 1800s, that's when they decided to form, how are we going to make this happen? So that's when they decided to facilitate and encourage Jewish migration from Europe and other places around the world to Palestine and create Jewish communities in Palestine where they formed certain settlements or kibbutz or farming communities. Now, later on, again, after the World War ended and the Allies won, they formed something called the Mandate process. And this was basically, was colonization. They just wanted to use a pretty word instead of saying we're going to colonize these areas. So they said mandate. And the idea in the mandate was that these countries were supposed to take control over these areas for a certain period of time until they civilize the people who are living in it and enable them to rule and govern themselves, as if these people were not civilized enough in the eyes of these European countries. So Britain took control of Palestine and Jordan, while Syria took Lebanon and Syria and Lebanon. Now, in 1917 is one of the most important points where we need to remember is when the Secretary of State or the Foreign Secretary of the UK made what is known as the Balfour Declaration, promising the land of Palestine to the Zionist movement for them to build their homes. In his declaration, he specifically said that this country shall not prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. So basically 90% of the population that lived in that area at the time of his declaration were really so degraded by Balfour to call them non-Jewish communities living in anyway, moving forward, immigration kept on going by Jews to the area, and then people in the area revolted many times against this idea, and Britain kept on giving different promises to both sides, conflicting promises that you could find so much about them. Now, moving quickly forward to 1948, when Britain felt like they just needed to leave because there was so much tension and they were done. And their empire was falling apart all around the world. So 1948, when the UK withdrew, by that time, the Jewish presence there had formed already many groups, armed groups, militias, such as the Aragon and the Haganah and so on, where they were heavily trained, they were equipped and supported by the British military. So when Britain left in 1948, abruptly they left, these militias were ready to take over the land and create Israel. And that was also known by Palestinians by the Nakba. Between 1947 and 1949, the vast majority of the population who lived in the area, so about 750,000 Palestinians from about 1.3 million who lived there, were forced to leave their homes, ethnic cleansing, right? So 78% of the historic Palestine was declared by the Zionist movement as the state of Israel. Over 530 villages and cities, Palestinians were destroyed. Over 15,000 Palestinians were killed by these militias in massacres that were taking place every day. There is documentaries that you could watch by Israeli people, by people who were actually in these gangs at that time, in these militias. And I encourage you guys to see it. Since that day, those people who fled and forcibly were displaced became refugees, mostly living in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan, but a lot of them also moved into the West Bank and Gaza, which are territories, are now considered to be occupied territories. Now, Gaza had a very small number of people living there at that time, but because of all these refugees, it became one of the most densely populated areas in the world. Most of these people living in Gaza today are refugees since 1948. So these 750,000 refugees, that Palestinians, are now total to about 6 million people. Now, the United Nations had made many resolutions. 194 resolution that these Palestinian refugees must have the right to return to their homes, which they never did. After that, 1967, another war happened between Israel and the neighboring countries, including Jordan, Syria, and Egypt, and the 6-Day War, and Israel took over the remaining parts of the land, which include the West Bank and Gaza. Also, the United Nations made another resolution, 242, which called for the withdrawal of Israeli forces from occupied territories and go back to the border pre-1967. That also never happened. So, what does occupation mean? Under international law, an occupation is when, under the 4th Geneva Convention, it is known as when a foreign military takes over land and people by force. Okay, simple. I don't know why people call this a complicated conflict. It's simple. There's an occupation. There's a military presence that's foreign, that's controlling these people in this land. All right. So between 1967 and modern history, what happened? So much has happened. Uprising, intifadas, which we call them in Arabic, which is uprising by Palestinians, other wars that happened between Israel and neighboring countries, and so on. Now, I'm gonna fast forward quickly because I see that I took a lot of time. I wanna focus on defining a few things. So, since Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza, it has committed almost every single international crime that you could find under international law. Settlements. Let's start with settlements. It has built settlements all over the West Bank, which is a clear violation of international law. Moving your population from the occupier's territory into the occupied territory on its own is a violation of international law. Changing the dynamics, changing the demographics of the occupied territory is a violation of international law. Destroying homes in the occupied territory is a violation of international law. And I can keep on going. There was a peace process during this time known as the Oslo and that led us to nowhere. In 1993, the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and the State of Israel signed this treaty where they were supposed to negotiate the final resolution between them according to UN Resolution 242 and so on, and for eventually, after 6 years, for Israel to withdraw. That never happened either. Even Palestinian prisoners who were at that time in Israeli prisons were supposed to be released, and up to this day, talking about almost 30 years later, there still are over 40 Palestinian prisoners that have been held by Israel even pre the Oslo Accords, and they are still there. Now, during this peace process and all these different negotiation rounds back and forth between Palestinians and the Israeli government, Israel has rapidly expanded its settlements building. Prior to the start of this peace process, which should lead to the two-state solution that the world keeps on talking about, there was less than 200,000 or 150,000 settlers living in the occupied territory. Today, after 30 years, this number is almost 800,000 settlers. These settlers used to live in, lost my notes, I lost the numbers, but they used to live in about 30 or so settlements, which now are over 300 settlements and outposts on Palestinian property. Most of it is Palestinian private property owned by Palestinians, and we have these settlements all over the West Bank. All right. Now, you will hear a lot about, and you probably hear a lot about, that Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, which is true. They withdrew partially. They withdrew the settlements, and they withdrew their actual military presence inside the Gaza Strip. However, it has maintained complete control over everything that has to do with Gaza. It kept control of the space, the land, the waters, control of the electricity, control of the fuel, control of who leaves and enters Gaza, the movement of the Gazan people. Everything about Gaza is still, up to this day, under the full control of the Israeli occupation. Therefore, under international law, Gaza is still an occupied territory. Now, in the West Bank, Israel decided to build a wall. And this wall, I don't know how you move the screen, this wall is known as the apartheid wall, or the separation wall. Now, you may, the idea of apartheid, the definition of apartheid, according to International Convention of the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid, defines apartheid as inhumane acts committed for the purpose of establishing and maintaining domination by one racial group of persons over other racial groups of persons and systematically oppressing them. And this has what's been happening in the West Bank since 1967, really, not just because of the wall. The West Bank has been divided into small enclaves, and you see in this image, you have what is agreed upon by the world, that this was an apartheid regime in South Africa on the left, and then on the right you find the West Bank. And it's the same exact thing. You have these small enclaves of one racial group stuck in these enclaves, and then the rest of it is under the control of another racial group who controls everything. And the West Bank has turned into this. You have small cities, small towns, small villages, all completely controlled by Israeli checkpoints, by Israeli settlements, and everything about these lives of these people has been controlled by the occupying force. And therefore, we do believe that this is an apartheid system, as recognized by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Beit Tselem, an Israeli organization for human rights. Now, this wall is not a fence, by the way. It's an actual wall. It's a big wall, too, that extends all around the West Bank. Now, if you notice on this image here, these lines, the black and red lines, the wall is not even built on what should become the border of the State of Israel based on what we know as the two-state solution. It deeply extends inside the West Bank, confiscating territories, environmental resources, such as water and other supplies, and deeply crosses through the West Bank, making some cities only able to enter and exit from one entrance only. Every single city and town has gates, has checkpoints that surround it, that control everything that goes in and out of these cities. All right, these are the checkpoints as well. All right, now political prisoners. Since 1967, Israel is estimated to have taken over 1 million Palestinian people into its prison system. 1 why so many people go to prison by Israel? Well, because everything is illegal. Everything that Palestinians do is illegal. The biggest, over 1,200 Palestinian children under the age of 18 are in Israel, have been in Israel prison since the year 2000. One of the most common crimes that they have committed is throwing a stone. And this is punishable to up to 20 years by Israel for a child who's under 18 years old. That's why so many Palestinians go under Israeli prisons. As of October 1st, remember October 1st, that was pre-October 7th, right? Over 5,200 Palestinians, including 33 women and 170 children under the age of 18, were held by Israeli prison. Israel has a famous method of taking people, which is called administrative detention, which is holding people indefinitely without any charges, any trials, or any right to even an attorney. They could hold someone indefinitely for that. Over 1,200 Palestinians, and again, this is as of October 1st, have been held by Israel under administrative detention. Some are held for many, many years under this administrative detention. So, I think I summarized most of it. Yeah. It's impossible to do what I was supposed to do. Tell you about the history of Palestine within 10 minutes, which I took much longer. So I'm going to hand it over to the other speakers, and I look forward to questions. And they are going to end at 1:30, but I'm willing to stay with you guys for as long as you want to stay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Madison, again. Our next speaker is going to be Emma Pierce. Emma Pierce has a Master of Arts in Understanding Security and Human Rights from the University of London, where she recently had her she had a dissertation that examined the intersection of settler colonialism and ecology in Al-Walahaja, a village in the West Bank. So we'll have Emma take it over. Oh, hold on. One sec, let me see if I can get the audio going. You can share your screen. Can you speak? I just want to make sure everyone can hear your audio. Emma. I'm just going to try and see if I can get your audio set up. One sec. Do you know how to get the audio on here? From there?
Are you muted? That might be a problem.
No, she's not muted, but it's just coming out.
Is your computer muted?
No, I can hear her. It's just coming out of here, not into the sound system. Emma, we're gonna hold on one sec, and we're just gonna have Jenna present. She doesn't have any visuals, so. Next, we'll have. One sec. Next, we're gonna have Jenna. You want to introduce yourself? Thank you so much.
Hi everyone. I'm actually happy to do it from here as well. I don't think this is certainly not on, right? Am I just loud? Hello?
No.
Oh, there we go. Hi. So my name is Jenna Atras. I am a Palestinian American. I'm an attorney. I also practice immigration law, primarily federal mandamus litigation. So I spend all my time suing Joe Biden and Senator Blinken for their unreasonable delays and unlawful detainment and separation of families. So that's the process I'm operating under. I also want to echo a lot of, or I don't want to repeat because I think Mazen did an incredible job, but I do want to highlight and underscore the point that we are all either attorneys or future attorneys, and so in that vein, I wanted to kind of offer some form of case study. And I think one of the things that I learned early on in law school is that you're given a set of facts, you're asked to issue spot, you're asked to make conclusions, and you're asked to apply law. And in order to do that is one of the most reasonable ways in order to understand a situation and understand problems, solutions, and how we operate within those things. It's also important to understand that law plans for contingencies, law plans for the fact that people are probably going to break it, and how we respond to those types of things. So even war has law, right? Even occupations have law, because people who wrote these laws guaranteed the fact that people were probably going to commit war and they were probably going to occupy other people. And the history of settler colonialism is a very vast one, and much of the global South has been impacted by it. So with that being the backdrop, it's important, as Mazen has illustrated, that words have meanings. Precision of language is extremely important. And so the terms that matter here, I think we've kind of talked through, tried to define, identify occupation, settler colonialism. In recent days, we've been talking about things like human shields. We've been talking about rights of self-defense. We've been talking about all of those types of terms as well, and they have legal definable meanings, and they have responses that are adequate based on if those legal elements are met. So if you'll indulge me, we can go through a little bit of an understanding and analysis about what it means to defend a state and what defense of that state looks like. And I think that having the backdrop of what occupation is, what apartheid is, helps inform the current moment and the current situation that we're in. And I also hope that with the background that Mazen spoke about, we understand that when someone says, and we've heard these, I know a lot of people in this room have been super tuned in online, and so they're listening to people on all sides of the aisle talk about these types of things. They also have probably heard a lot of people consistently say, this didn't begin on October 7th. And the response to that has often been, you are minimizing, you are forgetting about pain, about bloodshed, about all of these types of things. But I think one thing I would urge everybody to understand is that analysis does not rise to the level of excuse. Analysis is necessary, analysis is important, and refusal to engage in analysis of a broadband contextualization of a situation is akin to being just unbelievably disingenuous. And so that's what I hope we can do today. We can be genuine and we can be understanding. So presently, it is October 9th. We are 32 days of November 9th, I'm so sorry. My brain clearly has been on retrograde since October 7th. So it's November 9th. That's 31 days of conflict. I know that term, I'm just gonna breeze through some of these terms for the sake of argument. And we have numbers. We have numbers, and those numbers are important because numbers, show what has happened and where we're going. That's how analysis works. So, as of today, nearly up to, the numbers are contested, 1,400 Israeli citizens have died. 240 individuals have been kidnapped, various backgrounds, various ethnicity, various country of citizenship, both civilian and military personnel, right? So that's the numbers on the Israeli side. In Gaza, and I'm going to separate because Mazen made a very clear point, there's a distinction between Gaza and the West Bank. In Gaza, over 10,000 people are dead. Nearly 5,000 of them are children. Estimates of 60 Hamas fighters have been killed. And a senior Biden official just this morning, and I made sure to check, a senior Biden official who's Assistant Secretary of State for the NEA has said that the death toll is likely much higher. UNICEF has also confirmed that through CNN, and so that's also taking into account that the numbers that we have are not exactly accurate. Not similar to what President Biden said. It's not a lower count, it's a higher count, and that has been confirmed by his administration. 34 journalists have been killed, that's about one a day. That's on the low end. 1.5 million people have been displaced. 700,000 of them are sheltering in buildings that are run by the UN. 97% of the water in Gaza is not fit for human consumption. The Red Cross has warned that we're on the brink of total and complete collapse. 1/3 of hospitals are not functioning. The largest university in Gaza has been fully flattened. The World Food Program has said that essential food items will be depleted within 1 to 3 days, and that was of this morning. That was the statistic that I pulled this morning. Children have accounted for 2 out of every 5 deaths, surpassing the number killed across all of the world's conflict zones. 11 bakeries have been bombed. 89 UN personnel individuals have been killed by airstrikes. There have been verified reports from both Israeli and alternative media, verifying reports of mosques, churches, hospitals, and schools that have been targeted and bombed. Whether, again, for the idea of Hamas militants or not being in those spaces, that is not the conversation here. We're talking strictly numbers. And all in all, that amounts to a 99.5% civilian death toll. There's a 99.5% civilian death toll in Gaza. That's Gaza. That's Gaza by itself. So then let's talk about the West Bank, right? So the West Bank and Gaza are different things. And we talked about, again, framing, language, all of these things are very, very important. We talked about the language of framing, and everyone always says this is an Israel-Hamas war. Israel-Hamas, what do those things mean? They mean that you're talking about two parties who are in conflict with one another. I say, how have 125 Palestinians in the West Bank been killed in the past 31 days as well? If this is a war between Gaza, or between Hamas and Israel, how come over 125 Palestinians in the West Bank have been killed? How come the number of political prisoners that Mazen spoke about so eloquently prior to this went from over 4,000 to has since doubled in the span of a month? How come there are over 10,000 political prisoners right now? The Palestinians across the board. The question that we have to ask ourselves is that there was an incident, an escalation, there was a terrorist attack, whatever you want to call it, that happened on October 7th. That is fact. The same way everything else I just identified is an absolute fact. So the question that we have to ask ourselves, given the amount of carnage, given the escalation, given the fact that these are continuing to happen, is what all of us have been saying: doesn't Israel have the right to defend itself? Right? So that's the question. That's the million-dollar question. It's the question, and it's the thing that our politicians in all avenues and all spaces have been consistently reiterating. When people are asking, why not ceasefire? Why aren't you supporting a ceasefire? The response is, Israel has a right to defend itself. Okay? So let's talk about terms again. We're back to being law students. Put your hats on. Because what does it mean to have the right to defend oneself? What is the law of self-defense? What does that mean? It applies differently to states than it does individuals, right? We know that, fundamentally speaking. So, what does defense look like when you are an occupying force? That's also an additional element to the question. You have the fact pattern here. Let's issue spot. What does it mean to defend an occupation? Every state has the right to defend itself, but does it have the right to defend an occupation? And what does it mean, and what does it look like when you defend an occupation? The short answer, I'll tell you, this is not just me, but the short answer is that Israel does not have the right to defend an occupation. It doesn't. It simply does not. The long answer is from Francesca Albanese, who's the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied territories, and argues that in the context of a proportional response, that in 30 hours following the events of October 7th, in 30 hours, Israel had regained control of its territory. So as of then, the right of self-defense in its own territory, again, we have the map still up, as of 30 hours after the initial attack, the right to defend itself in its own territory was exhausted. Then everything that followed after self-defense is what? What happens after self-defense? Are we calling this retaliation? Are we calling this retribution? Are we calling this an eye for an eye, life for life? What are the terms that we're talking about? So let's define them. Let's go in a little bit deeper. The right to self-defense, as recognized by Article 51 of the UN Charter, is a right attributable to states only in their international relations, and a state is allowed to recourse to self-defense if it is subject to another state's unlawful use of force. So there's elements here. The situation must involve an armed attack of sufficient gravity. We have that, right? Conducted between states as main subjects of international law. Neither Gaza nor the West Bank is a state. We know that. It's an occupied territory. And it must be of an international character. So Israel and allies, primarily the United States, argued that Israel can invoke the right to self-defense under international law as defined in Article 51 of the UN Charter, and the International Court of Justice rejected this legal opinion. The International Court of Justice rejected this legal opinion in its 2004 advisory opinion, explaining that an armed attack that would trigger Article 51 must be attributable to a sovereign state, but these attacks have emerged within Israel's jurisdictional control. We've already defined what an occupation means, what jurisdictional control means. So what does that leave us left with, right? It's not a matter of can you respond, it's a matter of proportionality, and it's a matter of what duties do you owe an occupied people for which you exert complete and total jurisdictional control. So, if Israel has a right to defend itself against rocket attacks and protect its citizens, yes, but must do so in accordance of occupational law, which ensures greater protection for the civilian population. And we all know that Palestinians do not govern nor protect themselves. everything points, all the statistics that I spent about 5 minutes rattling off earlier to you point into the vein of collective punishment, right? So when we know that the civilian death toll is 99.5% of the total death toll in Gaza for the past 31 days, let's talk about collective punishment. And if collective punishment done consistently with open intent happens, that's when you start to hear the term genocide being used. Again, I urge you as people who care about terms and their legal definitions, that these words aren't bad words, they're descriptors. They're bad actions, sure, but they're descriptors. They're not anti-Semitic descriptors when something meets elements, and they meet them very, very clearly. So, limitations of food, travel, water, medicine, total collapse of infrastructure, all of those types of things. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time because I know we have somebody else who wants to speak, but the definitions of what constitutes genocide, the forcible displacure of individuals, the cutting off of food and water, the insurance that people aren't going to have the basic necessities that they need, all of these types of things are being currently targeted towards national, ethnic, religious, racial, or religious groups. So we have those elements down, but you know the hardest part to prove about genocide is genocidal intent from a legal perspective. So there's two elements. You actually have to do the thing, and then you can't just say, well, it happened, so there's genocide. You have to actually be able to express intent, and we know how intent works in other areas of the law, right? So what does intent look like? And it has to be a very specific type of intent. It has to be special intent. That special intent is typically the hardest to prove in order to qualify something as a genocide. We don't use the word and throw the term around genocide left, right, and center to any type of situation, wartime or not, to be clear, that is one of the considerations. We don't throw that around for just anything. That's why we can count the genocides on our fingers typically when people are rattling off the list of genocide, because there has to be specific intent. And to the question of specific intent, look to Israel's leadership. It's simple. The Israeli army spokesperson Daniel Hagari said on the fourth day of the conflict, "We are dropping hundreds of tons of bombs on Gaza. The focus is on destruction, not accuracy." Netanyahu has said, "We will turn Gaza into an island of ruins." Politicians have called for the 1948 Nakba doubled. Israel's president Herzog, and it is said, it is an entire nation who are responsible. This rhetoric about civilians supposedly not being involved is absolutely untrue, and we will fight until we break their backs. The defense minister of Israel, Yoav Gallant, said there will be no electricity, no food, no fuel, everything is closed. We are fighting animal people and we are acting accordingly. The major general of the Israeli army, Ghassan Alian, said animal humans will be treated accordingly. You wanted hell and you'll get hell. Those are the people who have the ability to impact foreign policy. Those are military generals, those are presidents of states, those are people whose intent and when they say it and when they say it out loud matters. And so when we retort with Israel has the right to defend itself, all I ask is against whom and for what and in what capacity. And if it arises to collective punishment, have the moral clarity and the courage to call it more collective punishment. And if it is the collective punishment and it rises to the level of a legally definable term such as genocide, call it genocide. And I don't want to take too much time, but I just say this to explain that if with all of the evidence and an open mind, you consider the facts as they are laid out in front of you, and you cannot find yourself able to call things the legally definable terms that they are, it means possibly that you are holding on to a frame of reference that is no longer welcome in the 21st century, which is that the dehumanization of brown and black individuals, indigenous populations, is something that you can excuse based on settler colonialism, and the backdrop of that is one that I think individually, as attorneys, as people of conscience, that you should reject. And that's my thanks.
Thank you very much. Please make sure that the audio working for our folks online. If you want to jump off mute and see if you got somebody looking out.
If anybody wants to move closer, you can. Obviously, some people can leave for class, so feel free to move up.
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'll share my
You
screen.
can share your screen.
Okay, cool. Can you see it okay?
Yes. And to introduce Emma, again, Emma Pierce is zooming into us from London, England. She is just finished her, she's presenting her dissertation at multiple different conferences. And again, the dissertation is an examination on the intersection of settler colonialism and ecology in a village in the West Bank of Palestine. So Emma, I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, and thanks so much for organising this event, Chris, and for inviting me to speak today. It's a pleasure, and especially at this really difficult time in Palestine. Hopefully also we might have a bit of time at the end in the discussion to talk about current events, but for my presentation today I wanted to share the research that I carried out for my master's degree, as you mentioned, and it's a case study of a village in the West Bank called Al-Walaja, and I'm going to speak a bit about the relationship between settler colonialism and the environment there. So this is Al-Walaja. As you can see, it's a beautiful hillside village. It's about 5 kilometers west of Bethlehem, and it's right on the edge of the Jerusalem suburbs. It's home to about 3,000 Palestinians, and historically many of them have been farmers. The village has a rich agricultural history and ancient agricultural terraces that date back to the Roman period. Unfortunately, as you can also see, Al-Walaja is surrounded by the Israeli separation wall, and I think Mazen mentioned that some villages are surrounded by the wall and only accessible by a single checkpoint. So Al-Walaja is one of them. So I'm going to give you a very quick overview of the history of Al-Walaja since the 1940s. And this is really important to my research because, first of all, it demonstrates why we talk about Israel as a settler colonial state, and why all of the academic theories that are associated with settler colonialism are applicable here. And also, the history is important because you can't understand the village today without the historical settler colonial context, because it really governs every part of villagers' lives. So pre-1948, Al-Walaja looked like this on a map. It was a large area with significant agricultural land. It was one of the largest agricultural villages in Palestine. It exported fruits and vegetables to Jerusalem. And it was a thriving village, one of the most populous villages in rural Palestine. So then, as we've heard, the Nakba happened in 1948, and massacres and invasions displaced around 750,000 Palestinians, and 400 towns and villages were destroyed. The renowned post-colonial scholar Edward Said described it as a feat unparalleled in the history of settler colonialism. And for Al-Walaja, the Nakba and the Arab-Israeli war that followed led to the occupation of 66% of Al-Walaja land and its permanent annexation to Israel, and the ethnic cleansing of the village. So Palestinians from Al-Walaja were moved to a small area of undeveloped rural land that was left of the village. As you can see there, the area outlined in black is the new village of Al-Walaja and what we know today as Al-Walaja. And they were forced to build new homes and a new village. So then in 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel occupies the West Bank and annexes Jerusalem, including about another half of Palestinian Al-Walaja. But unlike the Nakba, Palestinians, for the most part, do remain in their homes on the newly annexed land, so there isn't the same immediate forced displacement and ethnic cleansing, but Palestinians do lose sovereignty over that newly annexed land. So skip forward a few decades. Israel starts building its separation wall between the West Bank and Israel. And in 2007, they start building the part of the wall in Al-Walajah. But the wall, as Mazen said, doesn't follow the armistice green line that was set out in 1949. Instead, it cuts into West Bank land, including about 30 to 35% of Al-Walajah land, as you can see there. Israel then built a settler-only bypass road, essentially a Jewish-only road, to connect Jerusalem to the Israeli settlements around Al-Walajah, and that's built on yet more of the village land. So today, Palestinians now have only 11% of the sovereignty that they did in 1948. As you can see, the black line is today's territory, and the grey area is the historic territory of Al-Walajah before 1948. So the scale of dispossession is massive. So I'll move on now to the environmental side of things, and starting with the construction of Israel's separation wall. The environmental effects of constructing the wall were significant. Explosives were used. They literally blew up the mountainside, disrupting the ecosystems there. As activists told me, the wall also intersected an ecological corridor, and also the large part of Al-Walajah's remaining agricultural land fell into the Israeli side of the wall, so villagers could no longer access the agricultural land. And also its spring, the village's main spring, Mein Hania, was also cut off by the wall, and it was the source of irrigation for their crops and the main domestic water supply for the village as well. And finally, the wall also caused significant damage to the amazing agricultural terraces of the village. These photos show the before and after of the damage to the terraces that was caused by clearing way for the separation wall. And so the separation wall was finished in 2016, and then a few years later, a new national park, a recreation spot for Israelis, was designated on the Israeli side of the wall. So on that map there, you can see the pink line is the separation wall, and then you can see that the national park, Rephaim Park, was built almost exactly on the Al-Walajah land that is now fenced off behind the wall, plus the historic land of the village pre-1948. And declaring national parks on former Palestinian villages is an incredibly common practice. It's about normalizing stolen land. And the majority of Al-Walajah's agricultural land is now part of the park. So Palestinian farming becomes increasingly criminalized because they're working on what is now nature protected land, and they can be fined for doing so. So not only did they implement a national park on the Al-Walajah land that was stolen in 1948 and by the separation wall, but now the Israeli authorities have also declared that the village land is, in their eyes, a protected area itself. So although there's no official Israeli national park in the village yet, the local authorities now prevent Palestinian building on the Palestinian side of Al-Walajah on the grounds of environmental protection. So despite the destruction of the terraces, the environmental destruction caused by the wall, the general catastrophic ecological impacts, they're saying Al-Walajah's environment needs to be protected from the Palestinians. And at the same time, Israeli construction projects continue unhindered. The Gilo settlement to the east of Al-Walajah is under expansion at the moment, and a new settlement to be built on Al-Walajah's land, the very little that remains under Palestinian sovereignty, is in the late stages of planning. That's called Har Gilo West. You can see that on the map there. And a bypass road was also built on the village land, as I mentioned, and construction of a new checkpoint is underway so that they move the checkpoint that Palestinians use to enter and exit the village away from the national park, because apparently that's a bit of a mood kill for the Israelis enjoying their picnics in the park. And a new neighbourhood of Jerusalem of about 5,000 housing units called Reches Levan is also being built nearby on the old land of Al-Walaja. So the upshot of this construction in terms of the environmental impacts is serious environmental harm to the area, and not just any area, but an area of Palestine, Israel, which has been described as the green lung, the source of oxygen and main carbon sink for the rest of the country. And as UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, point out, settlements cause serious environmental damage, contributing to the pollution of air, soil and water. So while large-scale construction continues for Israeli neighbourhoods and settlements on the historic land of Al-Walaja, Palestinians are deprived of their sovereignty and removed from their land by the implementation of national parks, while also suffering from environmental harm caused by Israeli construction. And Aviv Tatarsky from the Israeli planning rights NGO Iramim pointed out to me that the separation barrier and the national park are two sides of the coin. They're complementary sides of the move that was take over Al-Walaja lands. And when land is taken under environmental pretenses, we call it green grabbing. And this is a well-documented phenomenon when it comes to Israeli practice, as the Israeli scholar Iris Braverman has very thoroughly documented. So massive ecological damage is also being caused in a less visible way through Israeli restrictions on Palestinian building in the West Bank. Under the Oslo Accords, the West Bank was split into various zones, areas A, B, and C. In Area C, Israel controls planning permission, and Israeli authorities withhold authorization for almost all Palestinian construction, including essential basic public health infrastructure. 97% of Al-Walaja is located in Area C. So Area C restrictions are causing a lot of ecological damage in Al-Walaja because people are unable to build basic environmental infrastructure that they need. Just a few examples of the environmental harm are that firstly, there's no modern sewage infrastructure in Al-Walaja, so 54 litres of untreated sewage is released into the village environment per day. There's inadequate solid waste disposal services, which causes major pollution to the soil and groundwater. And there's also a water crisis and not enough water for farmers' crops and livestock. And so the overarching effects of these planning restrictions then are that living conditions are very poor, there are bad odours, there's pollution, and agriculture, including pastoral farming, has been decimated. And part of the problem is that it's a slow violence, meaning that the root cause, which is deliberate Israeli policy of preventing infrastructure building, is not that visible. And slow violence is characterized by ascribing immoral behindness to occupied communities. So the perception is that Palestinians have caused this decline in their living conditions, that they're poor guardians of their environment, and that they treat their ecology in an immoral and irresponsible way. And the result of this misattribution of blame is that Palestinians are associated with a narrative of decline. This is an age-old settler colonial narrative that serves to justify colonization. And it sets up a distinction between the settler on the one hand, as a deserving guardian of the land, one, because it's argued that Palestinians need saving from themselves because they can't take care of the environment, and two, because the waste and dirt and pollution that they live in renders them expendable. This is something that race and environmental justice scholars have called the racial state of expendability. So that brings me to the end of my presentation, and just wanted to share this quote that I think sums up this point about narratives of decline well, I think. And it's that Israeli settler colonialism has always involved eliminating the native Palestinians and their natural and ecological habitats, then discursively constructing the landscape as wasteland. So essentially, Israel destroys the Palestinian environment, blames Palestinians for that destruction, and then argues that colonization is necessary. Thank you.
Next, our final speaker, if Ali wants to turn your camera on and your mic on. And if you're able to, and if you're able to share your screen, Ali. I'll message him on WhatsApp.
You want to take a question while Ali shows up?
Yeah, if anybody has any questions right now, we can start with a question for our three panelists that are here, and let Ali set up. Cerise has the mic.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you for coming to speak at our campus. Oh, sorry. So thank you for coming to speak at our campus. My question concerns possible solutions to the conflict, given the information you've discussed today. So all of our speakers seem to have exceedingly developed knowledge regarding the history of conflict in the region as well as the laws of war. How should we use this information to come to solutions regarding the conflict that's happening now?
Well, look, there's two things that you need to distinguish between: politics and humanity, right? So, political solution, I think everyone would have a different opinion. You could say there's a two-state solution. You could say no, it has to be a one-state for all with equal rights and so on. There's different frames for a political solution. Eventually, the state of Israel, as a government, and the state of Palestine as a government is political entities. We could discuss what's the best way to do it. Humanitarianly, or on the other hand, the one solution that has to happen is all people living in that area must have equal rights. That's simple. That's a simple solution that must first happen before you can even figure out what political entities could develop or not develop. But all people living in that area, and including Palestinians obviously, must have equal rights in any political entity that they end up living in, right? Refugees, as international law prescribes, must be allowed to return to their homes. So that's a simple solution for the human rights of human people. He's ready?
Everyone to hear what you have to
Nobody
say, but
online can hear you.
We can't hear you.
Oh.
Yeah, we're gonna have you guys come. We'll move some chairs around too.
Is my mic not working with them?
It does, but
I don't know what's going on.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Emma's my guide. So I was saying that there's political solutions and there's humanitarian solutions. There's what humanity calls for, what the law calls for. So everyone living in that area and everyone around the world deserves to have equal rights, deserves to have the basic human rights guaranteed to them. All human rights. Okay? Refugees have a right to return. Palestinians and anyone else has a right to live equally as anyone else living in their area. So that's the solution that must happen, regardless of what political solutions we end up having. So governments, the state of Israel, state of Palestine, one state, two states, whatever it is, that's a political discussion for what kind of political entities could be formed or not formed. However, the people who are living there, regardless of which entity they end up falling under, must have equal rights as any other human being living anywhere in the world.
we'll take any other questions in here?
Can you,
Oh,
Serious?
oh, who has a question?
Can you talk a little bit about the history of what Hamas is? I'm seeing a lot of things online about it, and it's kind of confusing, and I want to know if I'm talking about it in the way that is most correct and most supportive of you.
Okay, I'm going to be frank about the Hamas question in general. I'm not a Hamas expert. I think there's an insistence, and I don't think this is from you, I think there's an insistence when people want to contextualize a situation to know who all parties are, right? And so it's easy when you have a title like Hamas, in order to say it's Hamas v. this, right? And like often we talk about Palestine and Israel as Palestine-Israel or the Arab-Israeli conflict. Like it's good for people to define the terms, where they're coming from and who's doing what. Hamas was started in the 80s. 87. So 1987 was the formation of Hamas. There's a charter, which I'm sure a lot of people in this room have either heard of or read. There's also an updated charter, 2017, which also, again, either you have heard of or read or not. I'm not of the business of trying to philosophize or understand or work through that type of question, particularly because the Hamas question tends to be primarily concerned about who did what on that day. And then Palestinian resistance as a large form is very, very nuanced and very broad. So Palestinian resistance, I would argue that speaking in these spaces, when under censorship, that's a form of Palestinian resistance. A protest, that's a form of Palestinian resistance. Being consistently wearing a hatla, these types of things are Palestinian resistance. So the idea of Palestinian liberation and resistance is a very, very long history, and Hamas is one part of that history. It's also important to note that the events of October 7th and this attack, this terrorist attack, this event, or whatever it is that you call it, this escalation, this most recent escalation, was not strictly Hamas based on the reports that we have on the ground. There were multiple forces at play here. And so if the question is who is Hamas, that is a question of who is defining Hamas. If you ask the United States, it is a terrorist organization. That is the U.S. definition of it. There are countries part of the UN Charter that part of in the UN that do not agree with that. I'm not making a determination one way or the other. I think it's who are they, what are they? The question to me is never about Hamas. It's never been about Hamas. The state of Israel was formed in 1948. Hamas was formed in 1987. Displacement of Palestinians occurred prior to 1987. Killings of Palestinians happen in places that are not controlled by Hamas at all. So the Hamas question is an interesting one from a geopolitical perspective. I agree. You know what I'm saying? It's an interesting one in terms of how do we define the players at hand? How do we define what's going on here? But Hamas is a tiny blip in a large, like a long timeline of understanding of the conflict. And it doesn't start with Hamas. It never started with Hamas, and it will not end with Hamas. It has nothing to do with that. And I would posit to say that the continuous conversation around Hamas creates somewhat of a shield for the actions of Israel and how they deal with the civilian population in Gaza. And that's my answer to that.
If I have another minute to answer. or maybe
Ali
someone
actually
else.
only has only
Okay,
10
let's go
minutes
with Ali.
remaining
Oh, no,
on
let's
his-
go. Ali's ready. I didn't see
Yeah.
Ali. We'll come back.
We'll come back to some questions, but Ali has a short amount of time he's able to present. Next is Ali Mordi. Ali and I met when we were at Geneva this past summer at the UN. He's a UN explosives ordnance disposal expert and an explosive ordnance risk education trainer. So I'll let Ali, if you could share your screen as well if you have something to show. If not, I'll let you take it away.
Hello, Chris. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So we want to talk about the Palestine. So I would like to say Assalamu alaikum to everyone. So for beginning, my name is Ali, and I'm honored to be here today to speak about the issue of the illegal occupation of Palestine. Let me first of all share my screen. Yeah, sorry. Wait a moment. Do you see this slide?
There we
No.
go. Should be coming up.
Oh. Yes. I think you can see it right now.
It's loading. There you go. You're good.
Okay. First of all, I'm as an explosive ordnance disposal activist. I have dedicated my career to saving people's lives for more than 20 years and have tried to enhance people's awareness about the danger of explosive ammunition around the world and ongoing violation of basic human rights. Today, I stand before you to discuss a pressing issue that demands our collective attention, the illegal occupation of Palestine. This issue is not only a matter of human rights violation and injustice, but also one that has far-reaching implication of the regional stability and global peace. So I can go on for this article, but as I told to Chris, I have received a call about half an hour ago. I received a call that one of the local shepherds has been killed by mine, so I have to go back to the incident area to investigate what happened there. So I try to give you some good information in the shortest. Everybody knows about the Palestine issues. So they have been occupied by some countries. They are suffering. They have some problems in food, in lifestyles and everything. But in my profession, I want to share some information about the minefield status of the Palestine. The Palestine has been contaminated by mines and unexploded ordnance, so we call it UXO, especially in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. So about 5 square kilometers of the Palestine has been contaminated by mines and UXO. Too many organizations and countries try to come to the Palestine and the Gaza Strip to start the demining and clearing the landmines. So if they have been faced by too many problems, like political problems, security problems, and they were not succeed to do that. So the United Nations Mine Action Service Organization, we call it UNMAS, so entered to this situation and talked to the Israeli sides and Palestine sides to convince them, okay, so here is the problem, you should do something about the people. So after the long discussion, they received acceptance to start the mining. The Halo Trust company from the Great Britain came to the Palestine to start the mining. So unfortunately, they have lost many colleagues, many local people. But in our side, it's better. It would be better to say in my side. So I try to train the Palestinian people whenever I met them. So they have too many problems to come out from the Palestine. So I try to send them some videographic training, some what can I say, documents, and I try to make them some educational video to how to deal with the mines, how to deactivate it, or how demolish the unexploded ordnance. Unfortunately, every day I receive some colleagues in the Palestine, so I don't know how can I help them? But as Chris knows that with some of the political way to give them some information about the new technology of the mines. So as you know, the technology goes higher and higher every day. So the mines and all explosive ordnance goes like this. So we have to update all the information about these facilities. So we try to do something. But about my slides, I can say you. Yes. You know, in this area, like we have two kind of the mines: anti-personal and anti-tank or anti-vehicle mines. So the most and the biggest area that we have dealt with it was in the Ramallah. So it was about 100 so it was huge, very huge. But so we were supposed to find
your connection's
about.
poor.
Sorry,
Your connection's pretty poor, just so you know.
do you hear me right now?
Yep, I can hear you a little bit.
Oh, sorry, I'm the border right now. So I was saying that. So we started or might clear the land mines in the Ramallah, in the land yellow, the biggest area that we were supposed to find more mines and unexploded ordnances. But unfortunately, we have found you know, about less than 100 or 300 mines. So we asked the Israeli side, so what happened about the other mines? They said that we have spread them in the other area. Going to the lands by walking to search meter boat.
Ali, your connection's a bit too poor, so I think we may have to cut your portion a little short. I'm sorry about that. Can you hear me?
I tried to give my presentation
You're good.
in your email. You can share it out. I'm
Yes.
really sorry.
No, don't worry, don't worry. You take care of what you need to take care of, right?
Yeah.
You will be safe.
Okay.
Thank
Now,
you.
yeah. So I try to leave you right now. So I try to send my presentation.
If you share it with me, I'll be able to share it with the student body. Thank you.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm sorry
Thank you.
for
No worries.
interruption.
No worries.
Okay, we're gonna open it up to questions.
Yeah, you can. Sorry, folks. Ali had just messaged me before. He mentioned it previously, but somebody that he works with had just been killed by a mine an hour and a half ago, and his colleagues had to go out, so that's why he was off. So he's been dealing with some stuff in his work, as this is a very active situation that's going on. So and we have some questions online we can take from some folks. If the presenters would like to just read. When Israel gives warning before sending airstrikes into residential areas, why does the Hamas give the same courtesy? When you say an occupation doesn't give the right to defend themselves, does that mean Israel should let Hamas kill them? I'm not sure if you guys would like to take that.
I can take it, okay. So, I mean, honestly, these questions probably are coming from CNN or somewhere. No offense there. But, so giving first of all, the warning that they keep on talking about, that Israel gives a warning. Well, what is the warning? What is the warning that they give before they bomb something? And by the way, they stopped giving it this time. They used to give it in the previous assaults on Gaza. This time they barely give it. But one kind of warning is sending a leaflet down or a message saying you must leave. Well, where could they leave to? You know, where could that person leave to? They are literally in a cage.
Ali, you gotta mute your, Ali, mute your microphone.
They are in a cage, and so first of all, there's nowhere to run to because Gaza is so small and it's densely people live there in a very high numbers, and everywhere is bombed in Gaza. Nothing is safe in Gaza. Not the north, not the south, not the east, it's all not safe. So there's nowhere to go. Another form of warning that Israel is famous for is sending a bomb, a smaller bomb, before sending the big bomb. So I'm not sure how effective that kind of warning is. By dropping a bomb on a house, a smaller one, with less destruction, and then a few minutes later sending a bigger bomb. And no one has to leave their house. I mean, it's your house, with warning or not. Even if you have the full time and road in front of you open. Why would you leave your house? Because they want to bomb it. The second question is about the self-defense, or should they let Hamas kill them? Well, I think simply, as Jenna said, an occupation based on international law, ICJ rulings, I encourage you all as law students to read the International Court of Justice's ruling on the wall, does not have a right to defend itself against acts of the people coming from the occupied territory. So probably the better solution is end the occupation, give the people their freedom, and then you'll be dealing with a foreign state. If Hamas attacks you, then you're dealing with a foreign state. Then I cannot stand in front of you here and say they do not have a right to defend themselves.
I think Mazen answered the question pretty clearly, but one of the things that I would just generally encourage people to think about who ask these types of questions is why the answer is how is there a more ethical way to kill? I think that's one of the things that just underlies a lot of these types of questions. What's the best way to kill a person? What's the best way to kill a child? If you give them a 15-minute head start, does that make it ethical? And I would just encourage that type of internal questioning about those types of questions, because there is a legal answer. There's a legal answer. You do not have the ability to indiscriminately target, carpet bomb, and kill thousands of civilians. That's the legal answer, warning or otherwise. And I would also encourage you to consider what the title that Israel has dubbed its own occupation forces as the most moral army in the world. And as the most moral army in the world, which is a self-designated title, not unlike an individual giving themselves a best boss ever mug, that type of question begs that there's answers there you have to ask about what's the most ethical way to kill a person. And I personally would argue that there is no ethical way. And if you can prevent that, and if you can find ways to prevent that, that include things like ceasefire, that include like ending the occupation, that should be where our collective energy in the 21st century is directed.
Our next question is going to be in person since we took a few online. Rachel?
Hi everyone. Thank you to our wonderful speakers. This has been really informative and amazing. I'm really glad that this is happening at school. My name is Rachel. I'm with the ACLU, but this is just me separately as my own individual entity. I have a journalism degree. I was a journalist before I was a law student, and I think something that has been so horrific is the targeting of journalists and their families. I think a huge part of what's happening right now is we have to be able to bear witness to what's happening, and I don't know if anyone's seen the graphic of the eyes closing of how many journalists are being killed. And so I guess now that we have this information and we are informed, and you guys have done a wonderful job of giving us a lot of history in a little bit of time, and we are able to work as kind of not that we can promote and establish what these brave journalists are trying to do. Okay, anyways, I'm sorry, it's a long question. My question is to you, Palestinian American friends, classmates, speakers, how can we be better activists? How can we support you now that we're educated and now that we have a position as law students to support? Thanks, sorry.
Chris, can I just wait real quickly? Just want to let you know, if you didn't see the webinar runner scheduled to end the webinar at 1:30, so that's going to go away, not because of anything other than just timing. And then this room's going to be reset up at 2, so we have a hard stop at some point, letting everybody know.
Emma, would you like to answer? I guess if you have an answer to a question, do you want to raise your hand?
I couldn't quite hear the first question.
So this question was about how could you better amplify the voices and help in the movement. So I think one important thing is everyone has to basically speak up. Don't be intimidated. Speak up all the time, anywhere you can. Everyone has different ways that they could help, really. Everyone has their own unique way that they could help with. Whether you're an attorney, or you're a doctor, or you're a nurse, or you work at a grocery store, there's different ways that you could help with. So speak up and try to find how best you fit. Support those who may need your help, if you can. And keep on putting pressure on our government that has been allowing this to happen for so many years. Putting pressure on it, even by just a phone call to a congressperson, or more than that. You don't have to always participate in protests or demonstrations, which is a good thing, but you don't have to always do that. You could have really your own way of making this an issue in this country and making it raise more awareness about it.
Any other questions in here?
Do you want to go up there?
Cerise is coming.
It's up there too.
A couple of weeks ago, a group of law students signed a joint letter condemning Israel's actions in Harvard and Columbia Law School. Their information was then publicly doxxed. They're on like billboards being paraded around the city on trucks, and they had their law firm jobs rescinded. Federal judges told them that they would never hire them, and a lot of corporate CEOs said these people will never be hired at our company. So there's clearly an intimidation tactic here. So we're law students, they're also hoping to get jobs in the future. So how do you reconcile our activism now versus our future careers?
So I think that's a great question. For those of you who maybe didn't hear the question, it was a question about censorship and what it looks like to want to be able to speak up about these types of issues despite fear of job offers being rescinded and otherwise and other doxing methods. So censorship on this type of issue and intimidation is not new. I think we've seen probably one of the most aggressive campaigns lately of trying to limit people's speech that, is top down, really. We saw the censorship of the only Palestinian congresswoman in our House of Representatives. We see phrases that are used commonly in protest spaces being deemed anti-Semitic. We have obviously people's job offers being taken away. I've had people individually reach out to me, and sometimes when you're a lawyer, you're the only lawyer people know. And so, despite telling them pretty consistently, like I don't practice employment in these types of law, people are coming up. So you're not wrong. It's happening at a much more frequent rate than I think it has before. But back when I was in college, I ended up on one of those websites, and I had to face and grapple with what that meant. I think we give as much power to these types of institutions and these types of intimidation tactics based on how we respond to them. And it doesn't mean that there's not going to be silencing, and doesn't mean there's not going to be rescission. I personally am of the opinion that each person should take the risk they see and deem fit. I understand that some people operate with a much higher level of privilege than other people do, just by the sheer nature of what we look like, the spaces that we occupy, the type of jobs that we're looking for, our family connections. So I'm not of the opinion personally that every single person needs to put their body, career, and everything on the line in that sort of capacity. I think there are personal risks that people have to consider for themselves. That being said, I am a visibly Muslim woman. I am Palestinian. I speak about these things very often, and I have the privilege of working at a law firm that is okay and encouraging of that. The only thing that I will say is that often when we speak out about things, there is going to be pushback. That pushback takes many forms. It's about you, your individual risk assessment level. I think there are things that we can do outside of that space as well. There's different forms. No, sorry. There's different forms of resistance, but more so than anything else, I hope not to be minimal, but I really intentionally, I believe in standing on the right side of history. I believe in raising your voice and saying something that needs to be said. I believe in all of those types of things. And there are just, a general shout out, there are organizations that are dedicated to helping you fight legal battles if you do find yourself in a position like this, such as PAL Legal. And CARE Ohio has also done that type of work too. So I think there are support systems. I hear what you're saying. I just think I think sometimes it's bigger than that, but that personal assessment has to be made by each individual person.
We have time for one more question.
I think Emma wants to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say briefly that I think with these things, there's kind of like a tipping point at which enough people are talking about it so that, the repression tactics are no longer effective, because if enough people are talking about it, they can't silence everyone. So I think it kind of goes back to the question someone asked earlier about how can you be a good activist and how can you help. I think just talking about it generally and just normalizing support for Palestine is useful, and it's kind of, there is strength in numbers, I suppose.
Cerise, you had that one more question. Somebody over there, one more question.
Abby?
And then after this, we'll have closing remarks from Afid, and then we will wrap up.
Hi, thank you again for being here. My question is, could you guys talk about what the international consequences are for genocide and what the likelihood that Palestinians are going to see justice in this way?
I try. I'm happy to try, because really, since the modern, let's say, international system developed after the World War II, specifically in the United Nations, there hasn't really been consistency. We've seen a lot of black, a lot of brown people taken up to ICC and then trying to be held accountable for the atrocities they've committed. We haven't seen any serious cases on the other side. There are certain, historical courts and tribunals that were taken place for after Yugoslavia and the Holocaust and so on, and the Nazis in Europe. But it depends on the international community, or it's really not the international community even. If you think about it, you have the vast majority of the United Nations believes that the occupation is wrong, with the exception of probably two, the US and the UK, right? UN votes have always been for 13 countries voting in the Security Council, voting with the end of an occupation, against the settlement buildings, against this, against that, except the US and the UK. So once the US decides that they want to actually uphold the law, then there is different avenues. We have the ICJ, we have the ICC, and there are different forms of holding people accountable. But is it really going to happen? We don't know. I mean, Putin was indicted by the ICC after just a few months of invading Ukraine, right? But 75 years of occupation with a long list of atrocities committed, we haven't seen one indictment come. So.
And I think something to just keep in mind is that despite not knowing where the end of this is, it doesn't stop people advocating up until that point for whatever that is. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a insistence on liberation. There's an insistence upon life. There's an insistence upon these types of core values. And I think that sometimes when we are faced with devastation of such magnitude, there's a feeling of hopelessness, and that there's nothing left that we can do at this point anyway. So, chalk it up to the graveyards of history. And I just would urge everybody, like, despite what may happen, what may not happen, we don't know. But that's why advocacy is really important.
I'm going to make my last closing remarks. I thank you all for coming today, and thank all of our guest speakers. And before you guys thank them all, I will pass off to Abby.
Hello, my name is Mufid Sayed. I'm a 3L here at Capitol, and what a great turnout. I'm so thankful to be able to talk about these things. I know I have always been an avid supporter of Palestine. I'm Palestinian. I came here from Palestine when I was young. The majority of my family still lives in Palestine. Ask all my classmates, and they will all tell you firsthand that I always talk about Palestine, no matter what. There's a running joke that's been going on saying, you'll know someone's Palestinian, it's because they'll never stop reminding you. And that is always true. That's what we were always believing when we were young. It's so hard coming and leaving your family behind. You know, and I'm not saying only Palestinians do this, a vast majority of other cultures and groups do this as well. It's so hard, but it's always difficult for people trying to erase their existence. Because there is a Palestinian people, there is a nation, there is a state that I consider. Well, some people don't consider it, and that's okay. But as future attorneys and as attorneys here to come and to speak about these things, it's important to have these monologues and these discussions. And thank you all from the bottom of my heart, as a student, as a future attorney, for all coming out, and especially to all my wonderful classmates and friends that I consider deeply as family. So thank you all for coming, and I appreciate this very much. And thank you to Chris and Cerise, Kaylee and Mary in the back for doing all of this. So it's much appreciated, and I can't say this from the bottom of my heart. Thank you all.
Huge thank you to our speakers who have spent a lot of their time just today with us so that we can understand a perspective that is actively being sequestered. Thank you.
Thank you all again, and thank you administration for your support in this entire process. There was a lot of logistics that went into this. If you all can swiftly and calmly exit